Okay, so here's a fact nobody teaches you in school. The first English colony in America, the very first one, everyone in it disappeared. Gone. Completely vanished. No bodies, no blood, no explanation, just nothing. And then, the second attempt, more than half the settlers were dead within a year. And some of them, this is real, this is documented, some of them ate each other to survive. And that catastrophic, cannibal-filled disaster is the foundation on which the United States of America was built. So today we're going to find out, how did a colony that was basically a death trap for over 20 years somehow become the richest, most powerful colony in all of North America? And what's the one single plant that changed everything? By the end of this video, you'll know something most people have never pieced together, and you will never look at Virginia the same way again. Let's start at the very beginning. Alright, let's back way up. We're going to 1584. England is watching Spain get absolutely filthy rich off of colonies in South and Central America. Gold, silver, treasure, and England is sitting there going, we want some of that. So Queen Elizabeth I gives a charter to a guy named Sir Walter Raleigh. And Raleigh is basically the Elon Musk of his day. Brilliant, ambitious, controversial, and very good at convincing wealthy people to give him money for big ideas. In 1585, the first group of settlers landed on Roanoke Island, which is off the coast of what is now North Carolina, and it did not go well. There were supply problems, conflicts with local native tribes, harsh conditions nobody was prepared for. Most settlers bailed and caught a ride back to England with Sir Francis Drake when he happened to swing by in 1586. But Raleigh wasn't giving up. In 1587, he had a second group of about 115 settlers, men, women, and children, back to Roanoke under the leadership of John White. And this is where it gets truly wild. John White's granddaughter, Virginia Dare, was born on August 18, 1587, the first English child born in the Americas. They were running low on supplies, so John White sailed back to England to get more. And here's the thing. It was 1588. England was literally in the middle of fighting off the Spanish Armada. Every ship was being used for the war. White couldn't get back. He was stuck in England for 3 years. When he finally returned to Roanoke in 1590, every single settler was gone. No bodies, no signs of a battle. The only clue? The word Croatoan carved into a post. Nobody has ever fully solved this mystery. To this day, theories range from the settlers merging with the Croatoan native tribe to disease or a failed attempt to relocate. We genuinely don't know. Now, you'd think England would take the hint, right? Nope, because at this point it wasn't just about adventure, it was about money. And money has a way of making people do spectacularly irrational things. Fast forward to 1606. A group of London businessmen, and I want to really emphasize the word businessmen here, petitioned King James I for a charter. They formed a company, the Virginia Company of London. On December 6, 1606, 3 ships set sail from England, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. They carried 104 English men and boys. Their average age was probably in the mid-20s. Many of them were gentlemen, meaning they were upper class, not particularly accustomed to manual labor, which, spoiler alert, is going to be a massive problem. After a roughly 4.5-month voyage, they arrived, and on May 13, 1607, they picked their spot on a marshy peninsula along the James River. They called it Jamestown, named after their king. And here's the thing about that spot they picked. It was swampy, it was mosquito-infested, it was brackish water, it was essentially one of the worst possible locations they could have chosen in terms of basic survival needs. Things would have been even worse without a figure you've definitely heard of, John Smith. Not that John Smith, there are about 40 of them in history. This John Smith, the colonist. He showed up and essentially bullied the colony into functioning. He famously instituted a "he who does not work shall not eat" policy, which is pretty ruthless, but also, honestly, probably kept people alive. He also negotiated with the Powhatan Confederacy, the powerful Native American nation in the region, led by a chief named Wahun Seneca, who is often called Chief Powhatan. Now, you've heard the Pocahontas story, right? John Smith, almost executed, Pocahontas throws herself in front of him. Yeah, historians are highly skeptical of that account. Smith himself didn't even write about it until years later. Pocahontas was a real person. Her real name was Amanut, and the Disney version of events is, let's say, liberally interpreted. John Smith left in 1609 after being injured in a gunpowder explosion. And without his leadership, the colony entered what is now known as, and this is the actual historical term, the Starving Time. The winter of 1609 to 1610 was the single worst period in the history of Jamestown. The population dropped from about 500 settlers to 60. Survivors ate horses, they ate dogs, cats, rats. Archaeological evidence uncovered in 2012 confirmed what historians had long suspected but didn't want to believe. Some colonists practiced cannibalism. The remains of a 14-year-old girl, nicknamed Jane by researchers at the Smithsonian, showed clear butchering marks consistent with being consumed as food. When spring arrived, the 60 survivors tried to abandon the colony entirely and sail back to England. They literally got into boats and started heading downriver. They were met, almost unbelievably, by a new fleet of supply ships bringing fresh colonists and a new governor. They turned around. They went back. Then a colonist named John Rolfe, the same John Rolfe who would later marry the real Pocahontas, he had an idea. The Spanish colonies were growing a tobacco strain called Nicotiana tobacco, and it was incredibly popular in Europe. So Rolfe smuggled seeds of the sweeter Spanish strain and planted them in Jamestown around 1612. The results were extraordinary. Virginia's climate and soil were perfect for tobacco. By 1614, the first commercial shipment hit London, and it was a hit. An enormous, massive, can't believe how popular this is, hit. By 1617, Virginia was exporting about 20,000 pounds of tobacco a year. By 1629, that number was over 1.5 million pounds. More settlers came. Land was needed, and that need for more land and cheap labor to work it led directly to the expansion of the tobacco plantation system, and with it, the intensification of something dark that would define the colony and eventually tear the nation apart 3 centuries later. The first recorded Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619. The same year, 1619, the Virginia colony established its General Assembly, the first representative legislative body in America. 2 extraordinary things happening in the same year. One a step towards democracy, one a step towards one of history's greatest crimes. Virginia became a crown colony in 1624. When the Virginia Company's charter was revoked, the company had gone bankrupt despite the tobacco boom, and King James took direct control. From that point on, Virginia grew into the most populous and most powerful of all the colonies. Virginia produced more presidents than any other state in American history. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe. The intellectual architects of the American Republic were all Virginia planters who grew up on the tobacco economy that Jamestown survivors had built from the ashes of disaster. And it all started with a marshy death trap. Corporate gamble, a vanished colony nobody has ever explained, and a plant that Europe couldn't get enough of. Virginia became the most powerful colony in North America, and it was almost a graveyard. The United States was not founded on noble ideals. Not at first. It was founded on desperation, corporate greed, starvation, and tobacco. Here's what I want you to sit with. The ideals, the freedom, the democracy, the all men are created equal stuff, that all came later. And some of the very men who wrote those beautiful words were were Virginia tobacco planters who owned hundreds of enslaved people. Thomas Jefferson wrote all manner created equal from a desk at Monticello on a plantation work by over 600 people he legally owned over his lifetime. That is not a comfortable fact, but it is the fact. Oh, and one more thing before we go, because this is genuinely wild. King James I, the guy who chartered the Virginia Company, who literally funded the founding of Jamestown, he hated tobacco. He wrote an entire pamphlet in 1604 called Counterblast to Tobacco, calling it loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose. And then 2 years later, he signed the charter for the colony whose survival would depend entirely on that plant. Virginia's tobacco taxes eventually helped fund the British war budget. So the king who hated tobacco was partially funding his wars with tobacco money. History, man. Virginia is the foundation. Every single thing that came after, the other 12 colonies, the Revolution, the Constitution, the United States itself, has Virginia in its bloodstream. It's tobacco, its General Assembly, its 1619 paradox, its stubborn, costly, complicated, extraordinary survival. The colony that should have been abandoned 3 times became the birthplace of a nation. History is wild. That's Virginia, episode 1 of 13. Next up, Massachusetts, the colony where the Pilgrims weren't even supposed to land, where half of them died in 3 months, and where a group of deeply religious people fleeing persecution built one of the most religiously intolerant colonies in the New World. The irony is spectacular, and the story is even better. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you in episode 2.